There's very little that we know with certainty about the Winds of Winter, other than it might never be published. I think it will be, but we'll see. Regardless of that, Martin has been very cagey about any details in this upcoming book for the past 13 years, as he doesn't want to spoil or reveal too much. With that being said, he has revealed a little bit. There are bits from interviews, from notes he's given to David and Dan of HBO's Game of Thrones, and from the text itself that seem to indicate with near certainty the doom of several characters, both main and tertiary, in the main series. And today, I'm going to take a look at each of those examples and each character that I think is certain or near certain to die in the Winds of Winter. I've done this before for every main Viewpoint character, but in these cases, the ones I'm discussing here, I think there is at least some indisputable evidence as to them dying in the Winds of Winter, both for the sake of the narrative and for the sake of their own potential arc, based on what Martin himself or the text itself has said. Let's discuss prophecy in Martin's story a little bit first, because I think that me even bringing that up in the intro probably raised a red flag for some of you, because Martin himself raises a lot of red flags as to this concept in the series itself. Prophecy is known to be a mule that kicks you in the head, according to Tyrion Lannister, and that very much does seem to be the case. There are a lot of times in our story where we see characters misinterpret prophecies, and that leads to their downfall. With that said, there are certain prophecies and certain people who can see the future who do seem to be proven time and time again to be accurate. There are a number of these that seem to foretell direct evidence of characters' dooms. We've seen this in the past of the series. We saw the Red Wedding foreshadowed in like 4 different circumstances by Daenerys, the House of the Undying in the books, by the Ghost of High Heart telling Arya and the Brotherhood Without Banners about it. We saw that same Ghost of High Heart tell of the death of Balon Greyjoy, and it seems as though certain other deaths have been foretold in similar ways, though not necessarily by the Ghost of High Heart. The characters that spring to mind first for me in this category are Tommen and Myrcella Baratheon, Cersei's 2 remaining children. I should have done air quotes on those Baratheons. They are both foretold to die based on the prophecies of Maggie the Frog, this woods witch who Cersei sought out in her youth. Everything else she said has come true for Cersei so far, and Cersei regularly thinks about this prophecy in terms of just being paranoid about it generally. Strangely, she doesn't seem to think much about this part of it, but she focuses a lot on her own downfall and demise by the hands of the Valonqar, but she does not really give any thought or brain space to you will have 3 children, gold will be their crowns, gold will be their shrouds. Their shrouds obviously refers to their funeral shrouds, saying that they will all precede Cersei in death in some way, which is quite notable. We see this happen in the show, but it is worth noting that it will be quite different in the books for a number of reasons. Starting with Tommen, as he is at the moment the more important of these 2 children, he jumps out of his window in the show, and I do not think that will be the case in the books, because he's like 8 in the books, and I don't think he really would do that. More likely, he's going to fall into the clutches of an individual who is going to end up killing him for the sake of ending the Lannister line. The most likely culprits at this point seem to either be the Sand Snakes that are currently headed to King's Landing, or Jon Connington, who has already expressed that he's going to end the Usurper's line once and for all. Though, of course, it's worth noting that once Tommen dies, he'll be resurrected by Qyburn and become the undead Valonqar who will eventually someday kill Cersei, if certain conspiracy theories are to be believed. It is worth noting that resurrection is a thing, but I don't think it really applies to any of these characters specifically. Myrcella also seems soon to die, but it's a little bit more unclear as to how and why this will happen. I think she'll probably survive longer than Tommen, as Tommen is the king who needs to be killed in order for Aegon to take the throne. I could see Myrcella being kept alive as a political pawn, but I doubt that she'll survive for very much longer. I could see the Martells killing her as well, particularly if Cersei angers them, which she seems very likely to do. If you've read A Feast for Crows, you know Cersei seems to anger literally everyone she interacts with politically and personally. And additionally, we do know that her trial by combat is being fought by the undead Mountain, who she did previously tell the Sand Snakes in Dorne had been killed. So they're likely to be more than a little pissed about that and might exact vengeance both against Tommen and potentially against Myrcella. With that said, if Myrcella is kept as a hostage, I could see her eventually succumbing to something like grayscale, as there have been so many negative comments about Shireen, this princess with grayscale on her face, and I think that Myrcella, who's already famed for her beauty and has now lost an ear and has a massive facial scar, also getting grayscale might both add insult to injury and kind of create a parallel that Martin likes to do. Oh, I'm getting a prophecy that you will subscribe to Quinn the GM in the immediate future in the next 5 seconds. Please like the video as well. Thank you. Goodbye. Before we jump from prophecy analysis to meta-analysis, I think there's one more character that specifically the Ghost of Highheart predicts the death of. And I got some pushback on this in my Winter's Coming for Sansa Stark video, but I think that the Ghost of Highheart predicts the death of Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, specifically because she says she sees, I'm proud of myself for saying that without stuttering, Sansa Stark killing a giant in a castle made of snow. Well, this could refer to Sansa's last chapter in Storm of Swords. I do think it's much more likely to end up being Sansa killing Littlefinger or having Littlefinger killed in Winterfell, as well, there is the snow castle of Winterfell in that last chapter. I think it fits the prophecy almost a little bit too well, and I think it's kind of the thing that Martin would like, oh, there's this kind of half-satisfying explanation that works early on in the story, and then, oh, we see the full thing, we see what really happens, and I think that's going to be Sansa killing Littlefinger in the north. So I don't know if that'll happen in the Winds of Winter specifically, or if that'll be in A Dream of Spring, but I do think Littlefinger is not long for this world as of this point, at least once he gets to Winterfell. Going over to meta-analysis and notes that the showrunners had from George R. R. Martin, we have two characters that are confirmed to die in the books by way of some method similar to what happened from the show. The first of these is Shireen Baratheon. We know of three major notes that David and Dan got from Martin, and one of them is the burning of Shireen, specifically that Stannis burns Shireen. This makes sense, as Stannis has been all about burning children in the past, like with Edric Storm, though that is a little unfair. He really didn't want to burn Edric Storm until all three of the Leech deaths ended up getting confirmed. But with that said, it's unclear exactly how that might happen in the books. As it currently stands, Shireen and Stannis are quite far apart. Stannis is marching on Winterfell and Shireen is still up at the Wall, so Stannis would either need to return to the Wall or Shireen would need to come south. This is why a lot of people tend to predict that Stannis might go north after failing to politically convince the Lords of the North to support him, especially if Stark ends up retaking Winterfell. So I think that might lead to at least some death of both of them at the Wall, given that burning Shireen might awaken the Stone Dragon and end up waking the Grayscale within Shireen. So it's unclear exactly how that might happen, but given that it did happen in the show, and we know that is a note from Martin as to what will happen in the books, it is almost certain to happen in the Winds of Winter, somehow. The other straight-up confirmed death, as sad as it might be, is Hodor. We know that George R. R. Martin has confirmed Hold the Door as the source of Hodor's name, and given how that plays out, I don't see any world in which Hodor could possibly survive the onslaught of whites that is currently attacking the Cave of Bloodraven and allowing Bran to escape. I think that Hodor's story ending in this kind of dramatic sacrifice does very much make sense. He's someone who's literally carried Bran on his back for this entire journey northward and has sacrificed some of his mind already by way of Bran warging into him against his will, which we learn from Varamir 6 begins an abomination to do and is just generally horrible. This magical tragedy just speaks so much to Martin's style of writing and how he likes to try and do time travel, if I could speak, in that he tends to like to have minds time travel, and if he were to warg into Hodor while he was time traveling to try to get Hodor to save him in the present, it could end up creating this loop that ends up damaging Hodor's consciousness and creating the man we now know. I think it's such a genius story beat, and the show really kind of botched it in a number of ways, but I am very excited to see how it plays out in the books, specifically in the Winds of Winter, because that one is definitely happening in Winds. Martin actually went a little more in-depth than I thought he had in an interview with Entertainment Weekly from a few years ago when this scene actually aired. To quote from that interview, "I thought they executed it very well, but there are going to be differences in the book," Martin said. "They did it very physical, hold the door with Hodor's strength. In the book, Hodor has stolen one of the old swords from the crypt. Bran has been warging into Hodor and practicing with his body because Bran has been trained in swordplay. So telling Hodor to hold the door is more like hold this pass, defend it when enemies are coming, and Hodor is fighting and killing them. A little different, but the same idea. This makes Bran's warging of Hodor in the scene seem a bit more active rather than just telling him to essentially be a doorstop. He's actually using his honed skills with the blade and taking over Hodor's mind to do so. I also like Martin's version a little bit more, as tends to be the case, but it does harken back to things like You Shall Not Pass and Lord of the Rings. At least that's the vibe that I got. There's one more category that I want to discuss. Martin is known as somebody who kills off characters a lot, and while that is semi-fair, there are a lot of side characters that die, there really aren't that many viewpoint characters that die. We've had Ned, Catelyn, Quentin, Aerys, and Jon, though all of these are either very recent viewpoint characters or have a way of coming back, or they're Ned Stark. With that said, we do know that Martin has said that viewpoint characters, plural, are going to die in the Winds of Winter. I don't think he's referring to the prologue. He doesn't often refer to prologues as viewpoint characters in and of themselves, as signaled by their chapters just being named either prologue or epilogue in either case. So it seems very likely that at least some characters are going to die in the Winds of Winter, at least viewpoint characters. I think that it won't be many, and Martin does have certain patterns he likes to follow in terms of killing viewpoint characters. Most notably that he only does that when there are other viewpoint characters around to view the death or the immediate aftermath of the death, with a few notable exceptions. So with that said, let's examine a few candidates who I think are quite likely to die in the Winds of Winter, knowing this. Candidate A is for Aeron Greyjoy. He's in dire straits right now, the Red Wine Straits, as he's currently tied to the prow of the Silence, the ship of his brother Euron. His one chapter we have from the Winds of Winter, The Forsaken, is one of the best in the entire series, but unfortunately I do believe it'll be Aeron's second to last, as he is currently in a situation that seems nearly impossible to survive. With that said, characters have survived situations like that before. Specifically, this battle brings to mind Davos surviving the Blackwater somehow, so I could see a world in which Aeron survives, but especially given that Sam is nearby to pick up the Viewpoint Torch and that Euron might someday sail to join Cersei or Victarion again, it does make sense that we would have more eyes on him, so Aeron is more dispensable as a Viewpoint character than ever now. So I think that overall he is pretty likely to die. I think we'll have one more chapter where we begin to see the Battle of Blood, and then we'll just end up losing eyes on Euron for a portion of the book, which would make sense. Have this big villain kind of lurk in the shadows rather than having eyes on him at all times. The next candidate is Barristan or Battle of Fire, whichever you prefer, but we do have three viewpoint characters all coming together for this massive battle in Meereen. I think that Barristan is far and away the most likely of these three to perish in this conflict, most notably because all of his previous chapters reference Criston Cole with being the Discarded Knight, the Queen's Guard, the Kingbreaker, and the Queen's Hand. I've talked about this in a dedicated video before, but I do think that all of that leads to a parallel with Criston Cole that does seem to be mirrored in Criston Cole's death. No spoilers for the rest of House of the Dragon. I won't get into that here. With that said, Barristan could end up surviving. I've heard people think that he might defect for Aegon and the Golden Company, causing him to be Dany's treason for gold. But overall, I think that if he doesn't die, Victarion could also die, given that he is summoning dragons to himself and he has really no clue as to how to control dragons outside of just loving the horn. So he very much could end up dying in a Quentin-esque fashion there too, but I do think it's less likely, especially given the fact that Martin seems to really enjoy writing Victarion, given that his role in the story has grown so much from what it once was, and he keeps trying to kill Victarion and failing. So I do think that Barristan is much more likely to die, and on top of that, Barristan was never meant to be a viewpoint character in the first place. He was invented to solve the Meereenese Knot, which has now been solved, and now that he is no longer useful, he might be dispensed with as a viewpoint all in, just overall. Coming back full circle to prophecy candidates, Cersei is our final candidate here. We know that she is going to die. The Ghost of High Heart tells us that the Valonqar will strangle the life from her, choke the life from her, I believe is the word. And I do think that it is likely that someone is going to kill Cersei. It's unclear exactly who or how or when, but Cersei just does not seem long for this world. She is out of allies and she is largely out of hope. There are a number of individuals that could end up killing her. I've said Tyrion, I've said Jaime, I've said Victarion, I've said Tommen. It could be any of those guys, but overall, she just seems very likely to die. Sorry, Cersei, I love your chapters. George R.R. Martin keeps insisting that The Winds of Winter is going to be a very dark book, and not just because nobody can see the long night. It's because there are going to be a number of deaths throughout the book of beloved characters, both main, secondary, tertiary, everybody. The notes and prophecies we do have indicate a few of these deaths, but undoubtedly we'll have even more. Most notably, the one that I wanted to talk about but didn't quite have time for was Patchface, who keeps popping up in Melisandre's visions with skulls about him, which seems like a death omen, but undoubtedly more characters than what I've listed here will end up dying in the Winds of Winter. But I'd be willing to put money on at least the non-viewpoints all dying, and at least two of the viewpoints I mentioned dying as well. So we will see exactly what happens if and when the Winds of Winter is ever published. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me grow the channel, and it just makes you feel good, and it's free. I talk about A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon all the time, and I'd love it if you join me and help me out. I really appreciate that, and yeah, I'll have more videos in the very near future. I've got a few ideas that I'm excited about, and I am actively still working on that very long video. It's just very daunting to edit because it's very long and it scares me. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to making more videos just for you specifically, you individually, viewer. I appreciate you. Goodbye.